They run out of food very quickly, so people start starving, and then there's also disease running around the settlement. And it is a walled settlement. Essentially, they are trapped with disease running rampant and there's not food. Social structures break down and it becomes a pretty hellish place to be. And so that is kind of the environment our servant girl finds herself in on the night she decides to skedaddle and get out of there. Hi, welcome to my channel. This is literature, and I'm Ella, and we're here to talk about books. One book in particular today, which is The VASTER WILDS by Lauren Groff. Look at that gold, giving us a little razzle dazzle. Okay, so what is this book about? So we are in colonial era in what will one day be the United States, and we have a young servant girl who escapes the walled settlement somewhere along the East Coast, and she runs off in the dead of night. It is winter. She only has what she can carry, which is like a couple of blankets and a hatchet and a knife and like a pewter cup. And she has some good boots, very important in winter to have some shoes. And now she must outrun a hired soldier, who has been sent after her to bring her back to the settlement because she's a servant and she doesn't get to just go wherever she wants. So now she has to outrun this soldier and also survive in the wilderness, in a country, in a landscape she knows nothing about. So she's in for it, I think. The author, Lauren Groff, is very celebrated. I think she's been nominated for the National Book Award 3 times. I think she's best known for Fates and Furies, which I think was like Obama named it one of his like favorite books of the year, and it blew up. And then her last one that was nominated was Matrix, about a medieval nun. This is her latest one. It came out in 2024. So the plot of this one is pretty straightforward. It is mostly a survivalist narrative. So we have our servant girl. She isn't really named. Some people call her Lamentations, which is a choice. And then her mistress called her Zed, but she doesn't consider either of those things her names. Her plan is to travel up north to where she believes some French settlements. And she is English. She's from England. So she's going to have to contend with, bad weather. It's the end of winter, so some days it's a little bit warmer and things are melting, and then sometimes there's bad weather. She has to deal with finding food, so she's facing starvation. She has to contend with wildlife. It's a very wild environment where there are bears and wolves. She also does encounter some people. So along with this narrative of her trying to survive, we also get flashbacks through her memories of her life before, when she was still living in the settlement, what that was like, and then what her life was like back in England. So her story is that she was born into a poorhouse in London, and when she was 4 years old, she was kind of like hired or bought by her mistress, which is a very wealthy woman. And at the beginning, she's kind of treated more like a pet. The mistress has a son. She's been trying to have more kids, but hasn't been able to conceive. She calls her Zed and kind of uses her as like a distraction as she waits to have more children. And then once she gets older, she is trained to be a servant in the household, and eventually she becomes the primary caretaker for the mistress's eventual daughter, who is called Bess. This daughter it's never defined, given the time period, but it seems like she has some sort of developmental or intellectual disability. So even though the servant is only a few years older than her, like 4 or 5 years older, she becomes her caretaker, and they develop quite a sisterly relationship. And our servant girl does end up having like genuine love and affection for Bess. So eventually her mistress remarries, and she marries a preacher. He wants to go to the New World, and so he brings the family there. They arrive in the New World, and they build a settlement. But then winter comes, and they have developed a very adversarial relationship with the native population there because they haven't treated them very well. And they run out of food very quickly, so people start starving, and then there's also disease running around the settlement. And it is a walled settlement, but you're not free to come and go. Essentially, they are trapped with disease running rampant and there's not food. Social structures break down and it becomes a pretty hellish place to be. And so that is kind of the environment our servant girl finds herself in on the night she decides to skedaddle and get out of there. But it's kind of a out of the fryer into the frying pan kind of situation, because she leaves a known hell for really an unknown, vast wilderness. She's lived in London her whole life. She's not familiar with nature. She doesn't have those skills and knowledge. So I really think that an opening can either reassure a reader that they're in good hands, or they can kind of put the reader on notice that maybe they might not be. And the first two sentences of this book really gave me pause because they were strangely like blah, just unimpressive. So these are the first two sentences. The moon hid itself behind the clouds. The wind spat an icy snow at angles. I mean, as description goes, it's clear, but it's not it doesn't grab me. You know, it's not lyrical, it's not poetic, it's not giving me a metaphor that's really surprising. But here's the third sentence, and I really think that this sentence should have been the first one. The tall black wall of the palisade through a slit too seemingly thin for human passage. The girl climbed into the great and terrible wilderness. Like, that's a good sentence. I don't know why she didn't start with that one. I'm kind of miffed about it. The writing in this is very sparse, which I appreciate for the most part. You know, the prose in this is very digestible. I read through whole chunks like that. And although you're not going to get, you know, poetic language, she does have some really nice like images from time to time. For instance, I'll give you a taste. Then she slid and came to rest upon a boulder velveted 2 fists deep with moss. I thought that was like a beautiful description, really tactile. Another thing I found a little curious was that the exact year when this happens is never explained. We don't get much of a sense. We don't even know what decade. Like, I'm kind of even guessing on the century, to be honest. I don't know, like early 1700s maybe? I'm not exactly sure. And also the exact location of where the settlement is not described. In the beginning, I'm like, oh, is this mid-Atlantic or is it farther north? I don't know. And I think it would be really good to know, because we know that like her goal, her destination is to get up north to the French settlements, which I'm thinking, okay, we're trying to get to Canada. And where you are along the coast is going to determine a lot of like, is this even a feasible plan? And it's also going to matter because like she says we're at the end of winter, spring could be coming, but like spring in, you know, Maine is very different than spring in North Carolina, right? So what we are going to expect with the weather is we don't really get a sense of that either. Another thing I found particularly questionable was that Groff doesn't capitalize how we would expect to usually use capitalization. Like names of places like Spain, the country of Spain, is not capitalized. She also doesn't capitalize the names of the native peoples. And she also doesn't capitalize God, G-O-D, which I felt was kind of curious because our character, our servant girl, is religious. She does think about God and her faith throughout the book. While the lack of capitalization of these words didn't disrupt my reading experience, it was a little confusing at the beginning. I mean, obviously this is a deliberate choice on Groff's half, but I don't know why she made this choice. Like, what is she trying to say or convey? I really couldn't tell you. Like, I thought, okay, well, maybe if she chooses not to capitalize sort of old world place names or people names, that would make sense because one of the themes is about colonialization. But then she also doesn't capitalize anything of the new world and the new world peoples. So I'm like, okay, well, that can't be it. It's a mystery to me. Another kind of grammatical prose choice was that there is no dialogue. So no quotations marks. There is reported speech, you know, where the narrator will tell you what somebody has said, but they don't put it in quotations. I remember with Groff's previous book, Matrix, which is about the medieval nuns. I had this memory of her doing an interview one time and talking about how there's no dialogue in that one either. It's all reported speech. And the reason she made that choice was that, you know, she didn't want to try to recreate dialogue and make that seem authentic because they spoke so differently back then. And so having reported speech, she could get across, you know, what these people are saying to each other without having to make it sound like authentically medieval. But what I found really curious is that in the reported speech in the VASTER Wilds, she uses like old-timey conventions, like people say ye, like ye will do that, and sort of thing. And so I thought, okay, if you're trying to not have to make it sound old-timey, then why report the speech with those kind of conventions? And it's also kind of curious to me, like, this is such a celebrated writer who has been nominated for so many awards and is so well regarded, but she's afraid of giving dialogue a go. Like, I think she could have come up with a convention and just rolled with it, and I think the reader would have bought it. It almost seems like she's cheating a little bit, trying to get away with, not tackling, the tough stuff about doing like historical fiction. So this book is on the shorter side. It's about 250 pages, which I actually think matches the content well. I mean, it's a survivalist story. Our main character is by herself for most of the book, so carrying it for much longer, I think, would have gotten a little dull. But nevertheless, the ending dragged for me. And I think that's mostly because by the time we get to the ending, it's kind of a foregone conclusion what is going to happen. And I'm going to give no spoilers. I'm going to try real hard and not give a spoiler. But I really felt like the ending kept on going and going, even though it's a foregone conclusion. It's almost like the author was searching for like a reason for the story to exist. There is a firm conclusion, like we know how it ends, and I appreciate that. But it felt like the last couple of chapters were just a whole bunch of words that the author was using to try to justify why did she take this reader on this big journey only to come to this ending. So I was really left wondering, why did the author choose to tell this story? There are some anti-colonialist themes, there's some feminist themes, there are some pro-environmental themes going on, like going through the book, but there's no strong like through line of what was this story about. I think if the writer wanted to tell just a straight survivalist story, then she needed like a different type of ending. But if she was trying to tell more of like a fable, because this book does have a fable like quality, like a moral or something, I don't think that really came through. That did not land for me. I don't really know what the takeaways were supposed to be there, or even if this book was supposed to have any takeaways, if it was just supposed to be an experience. I personally find those books, although they're interesting to read, they don't really stay with you long after. By the end of the book, I felt like those two beginning sentences really foreshadowed what the ending was going to be for me. And that was just kind of, okay, all right. This is not a bad book by any means. I really enjoyed most of the book. I read it very quickly, but I think overall, I was just a little underwhelmed by the end of it. As a survivalist tale goes, for the first 200 pages, so clear that she did so much research into, like, how does somebody survive in this environment? All of that content felt very natural and correct. Like, this seems like how somebody really could survive in that environment. If you're looking to really take something away from this, I don't know what it would be. All right, so that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much. And if you've read this one, please leave in comments what you thought about it. Were you satisfied with the ending? Do you think I'm off base? Let me know. And then always, if you could please like this video. This is only my third YouTube video. I'm still getting started here. And you giving this video a like is for free. And hopefully that will maybe make the algorithm show to more people and some more people can discover the video. And lastly, please subscribe, because that would be super cool. I'm going to post more videos. All right. Thank you. Bye.